Mr. Higginbotham, can you still hear us in the meeting room?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, good. So you have your statement to read to be able to join our meeting electronically, so go right ahead.
Okay. In accordance with school board policy BDD, I am unable to attend the meeting due to a medical condition specifically relating to a Tier 1 at-risk and immunocompromised family member. Attendance at a public meeting with increased potential for possible exposure to COVID-19 virus prevents my physical attendance. I ask that the board approve my participation through electronic communication from a remote location, specifically from my home address of 111 Ivy Arch, Yorktown, Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. So the meeting agenda, just before we go into the vote for that, is available by logging onto Board Docs through our YCSD website at yorkcountyschools.org. And we're streaming live video of our special meeting through the Division YouTube channel and YCSD TV. So the York County School Division mission statement is that the York County School Division is to engage all students in acquiring the skills and knowledge needed to make productive contributions. So again, our first action item now is that we need a motion and a second to approve Mr. Higginbotham's participation in this meeting for July 30th, 2020, the special meeting electronically from his remote location, his home at 111 Ivy Arch, due to a medical condition specifically to limit his exposure to COVID-19 virus relating to a Tier 1 at-risk immunocompromised family member. So is there a motion and a second?
Motion that Mr. Higginbotham be able to join us from our remote location.
Wonderful. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Second from Ms. Garrell. So Ms. Ford, if you would poll the board, please.
Yes, the motion is made by Mr. Schaefer and seconded by Mrs. Rawls to allow Mr. Higginbotham to participate electronically from his remote location. Mrs. Rawls?
Yes.
Mr. Maya?
Yes.
Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
And Mr. Richardson?
Yes.
The motion passed 4-0, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Ford, and we welcome Mr. Higginbotham to the meeting.
Thank you.
Our second action item this evening is consideration of approval of minutes from the special meetings on June the 15th, 2020 and June the 29th, 2020. And I need a motion and a second to approve these minutes for these special meetings. Is there a motion?
I move we approve the minutes from the special meetings on June 15, 2020 and June 29, 2020.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Ford, if you would poll the board, please.
Yes, the motion was made by Mr. Maya and seconded by Mrs. Rawls to approve the minutes from our special meetings of June 15th and June 29th, 2020. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mr. Maya?
Yes.
Mr. Higginbotham?
Yes.
Ms. Rawls?
Yes.
And Mr. Richardson?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passed 5-0.
So our third and last action item is the board to consider the superintendent's recommendation to start the school year, the consideration of the approval of the return to school plan. But before we consider the motion, I'm going to ask Dr. Shandor if he has any additional comments to share regarding the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Good evening, board members. I'm going to ask the board for permission to recognize a speaker who's with us this evening to provide some background information related to the recommendations which I've previously referred.
Is that the consensus of the board? Is it okay for Mr. Pierce? Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Higginbotham? Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Kevin Pierce. He is the emergency coordinator with the Peninsula Health District, and he's worked with us. You've heard us reference our ongoing communications with the Peninsula Health District, and this is who we've been working with. So, Kevin, thank you so much for being here this evening.
And thank you to the board for allowing me to speak tonight. In conjunction with this, we'll share a little bit of data, and then we'll kind of work our way out from there because we're all members of the Peninsula at large. And that will have a significant impact on decision-making for the school board. Initially, I would like you to know that we have been having ongoing communications. We certainly recognized the issue in China on the 19th of January that was reported to senior staff at not only the health department, but the chief administrative officers for all 6 localities here on the peninsula. We met with senior leadership in February with regard to each one of those localities and some planning assumptions and intent with how to mitigate any pandemic specific to this one as well. In conjunction with that, we have met frequently, either remotely or directly now, thank you very much, as the planning has been going on. Response efforts from the health district have applied. Certainly we were very concerned until the governor's edict came down with regard to school closures and the impact that that would have. along with a variety of other things. And we'll get into some of that as we go through some of the material. Thank you, Jason. If you are looking at the document that is posted, you'll see that it's BDH interim guidance for schools. And I only intend to speak directly to two of the bullet points. The first bullet point, which is what is the COVID case incidence rate, and is it increasing or decreasing? And the fifth bullet point, which is what is the PCR test percent positivity for COVID-19, and is it increasing or decreasing? If you would go to page 3, as we talked about. Thank you very much. If you go throughout that document, it divides the environment for school openings into several categories: low, medium, and high risk. In this particular case, we're concerned about community infections that are occurring, and we're going to talk briefly about that in a moment. Next slide, please, sir. In this first slide, this comes off the coronavirus website that BDH has posted. It updates daily at 10 o'clock in the morning. And this is today's snapshot for the Peninsula Health District. And we have highlighted York County specifically there. When we look at the case rate, please note that the case rate is based on a population of 100,000. This allows us to make comparisons between localities regardless of the resident population. So for York County, it's 68,000. This is an estimate if the population was about 100,000. In this case, we can see that the case rate is currently 432 cases. You can notice in the subdued text that the neighboring localities also have relatively high rates. And that's an area of concern. When we talk about the case incident rate, it is increasing, and we'll demonstrate that as we move through the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. The information that I utilize in order to make recommendations, not just to the school system, but to other organizations that we consult with, are based on these two highlighted portions. The first one is that case incident rate and the case positivity rate. Case incident rate should be dropping for 2 weeks in a row in order to meet that gating criteria. And the case positivity rate should be shooting at less than 1% for all of the testing that we're doing. In the case calculated today, the Peninsula at large, all 6 localities, have a case positivity rate of 7.7%. That will change daily. And it's important for us to understand that all of us are watching science happen in real time, and this is not retrospective. It's literally every day. Next slide, please. And if we look here, the chart on the left, the cumulative number of cases will always continue to rise until we get a handle on the infection sometime probably next year. But the report by daily count, even though they don't have a rolling average posted, although I've asked BDH to do that, you can see that we have increasing case counts in York County specifically up to the current date. In conjunction with that, it's my concern as your public health planner that we continue to monitor the information on a daily and routine basis. The other points on the interim guidance are also data elements that I use on a day-to-day basis. Outside of this particular environment, we're also having conversations with all 6 localities. There's a weekly phone call at the Peninsula COVID Operations Center, where we have representatives from all of our acute care facilities, the VA hospital. Each one of the CAOs has a representative there, our EMS agencies and our police agencies as well.
And Mr. Pierce, before we go further, there was a slide about 3 slides back. Are we in a substantial level?
We are in a substantial level based on the cases that are coming into, or that we're seeing in our area. As we discussed briefly before the meeting, and I'll entertain the question at your convenience, Part of it is based on testing availability, and part of it is based on where our testing is occurring. And I'll elucidate on that question. So communications are ongoing, and we're very concerned on that. Now, outside of that area, I'd like to provide an example of some of the things that we're concerned about. In the last 2 weeks, and it's public knowledge at this point, obviously, because there was a press release from the fire department, we had a single point case at one of our fire stations here in York County. By the end of the contact investigation, there were at least 14 individuals with positive tests, which forced the county into combining 2 fire stations in order to keep that fully functional with human resources. This is an ongoing issue, not just in fire departments, where I get an awful lot of information because of the uniformed personnel, but in other environments as well, and this is one of the driving concerns when we put anybody in large groups. In addition to that, there will be infections in other areas. As you know, we focused on long-term care facilities. All of them have had baseline testing, but not routine testing. We talked briefly about how frequently testing needs to occur, and that will be an ongoing consideration as well. And with that, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that the board may.
Can you pull up the slide that talked about the substantive?
Would you go to page 3 on the PDF file, please? So here we have the category where it talks about substantial, stay right there if you'd be so kind, Jason, where it talks about substantial and the actions that the school system needs to take with regard to that. The issue that we have is that we're looking at the trend line, not specifically for the county, but for the peninsula, since although the kids are going to York County schools, staff, others are all living in adjacent jurisdictions. So we look at the peninsula as a little bit of a microcosm because it's got some physical boundaries. So if we look at the eastern region on the coronavirus page, we've got steady climb for going into about 3 weeks. Although there's a dip at the end of that particular graph, a lot of that is a lag in reporting information of when the testing comes in, where are we at in contact investigation, and so on. So as an example, when the outbreak initially occurred here on the peninsula, we had cases that were travel related in northern James City County and Williamsburg. That was our indicator, and it was a pretty tense time. And then we began seeing cases throughout all jurisdictions here on the peninsula. When we start looking at where all of those cases are occurring, no one is spared as far as the localities are concerned. And in conjunction with that, we need to have that trend line, that 7-day rolling average. We need to have that decrease for about 2 weeks in a row in order to feel like we've got a good sense of what's happening with it. In conjunction with that, part of that critical path item is going to be the testing that's available, whether it's for individuals, the lag time in getting results back on any of these testing modalities right now. There are tests that are available in 15 minutes at one location in Richmond. There are day-to-day tests at many of our urgent care centers, and we can get that material back, and it ranges, depending on what day of the week it is, between 2 to 3 days and up to about 10 days at this point. So that's a concern, especially when we talk about contact investigations. If you go about your normal business for 10 days, how many people do you come in contact with in that 10 days? And that puts a significant strain on trying to get control of the virus. Currently, some of our cases that are being tracked through the health department have in the hundreds of contacts in a short period of time. And this is a troubling issue when we start looking at the reasoning behind Executive Order 68, which has shut down a great deal of the social activities where we see transmission occurring.
So on the schools bullet number 4, I'm trying to read it from a distance. I just want to make sure I'm reading it right. Can you cover that one, the recommendation?
Remote learning should be considered as the primary method of instruction as described in the Phase 1 guidance for Virginia schools. My recommendation as a planner, based on the data that I see, drives me in exactly that direction. The reason we had to focus on long-term care facilities is because it's an enclosed environment with a lot of people. And a lot of people is not just the patients, it's the staff as well. And so that's an ongoing issue. It certainly applies with regard to the school environment, depending, even with other non-pharmaceutical interventions, there will still be some close contact between children and adults and so on. Yes, sir.
What would it take to get us to move down from substantial?
Substantial will be dependent on a couple of things that are out of our control. That's going to be the testing turnaround. Mostly that's going to be Quest and LabCorp, who are the actual back end for Velocity or MD Express or anybody else for that matter. But your private physician probably uses LabCorp for that. The second one will be, in my assessment, testing availability. Now, although LabCorp has now got a test-at-home product, the question will be, what's the turnaround on that as well? So testing turnaround and the availability of testing will be critical in my assessment. Those two items will drive down both the case positivity rate, because if I do a lot of testing and a lot of people aren't ill, then that drives that number down, and it will allow us to feel comfortable when the case counts start easing over and dropping down, so that we have decreasing cases reported over the course of a two-week time frame. And that would allow us to move from substantial into a lesser category. Although I'll be worried until it all goes away.
I'm going to ask Mr. Higginbotham, since he's remote, if he had any additional questions. If you want.
Yes, you talked about metrics a little bit. Can you just reinforce those metrics for us and anyone in the community, the two that you were talking about?
Certainly. When we talk about the cases that come in, we need a downward trend for 2 weeks. We can isolate down to the individual locality, in this case, York County, or we can utilize the Eastern region as a guide, which covers about 3 million people who live in one jurisdiction, work in another jurisdiction, and have activities that are located in yet other jurisdictions. So caseload is going to be part of that issue, and there's been an upward trend for about 3 weeks. We're interested in that downward trend for a minimum of 2 weeks in order to aid in our decision-making and our confidence. The second one is case positivity rate. So if I do everyone in the school system, how many people do I find positive out of that large number? And if the case positivity rate is less than 1%, that gives us a high level of confidence that risk is low. We're not there yet. Today's calculation was 7.7% of the tests that have been accomplished on the peninsula.
Thank you.
No, all questions are answered. I appreciate it.
I'll ask one more time if anybody has any last minute questions. I know you have another meeting that you need to take off to attend as well. So any other questions? Thank you so much. We really appreciate your input.
Absolutely.
Your time.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Kevin, we appreciate it. Thank you very much for being here and for your constant collaboration and communication with us. And Kevin always picks up the phone every time we call him, so we appreciate it.
So far.
Thank you. Have a great day.
So before we move further, I just want to make sure Dr. Shandor has anything else.
We don't have any other information to share.
So I think at this time, for the purposes of open discussion, we should start with a motion so we can open discussion and discuss the matter.
Yeah, I will be happy to make a motion to consider the approval of the return to school plans so that we can begin our discussion.
Okay, is there a second to the motion, Mr. Higginbotham?
I second.
Okay, Mr. Schaefer, second. Ms. board, we're not going to poll the board yet. We're going to open it for discussion. So I'm going to open the floor for discussion. So any questions? Gerald, I know you were discussing me earlier when we talked that you may have some questions.
Yes, I do have some questions. So one of the questions I have about your recommendation is why was the 9 week, why that number? Why 9 weeks when you put that
Thank you.
recommendation out?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Earl. When I made the recommendation last week, we were experiencing a 3-week increase in positive cases in our area, reaching a peak of 11.4% at one point. And what was the percentage you just shared?
7.7.
So it's 7.7 now. We also have to consider our entire area, as more than half of our staff live in other localities, as we share. Also, as you recall from the presentation last week, we stated we will be looking at health metrics and staffing capacity every 2 weeks to establish natural opportunities for return, such as first Monday of the month, beginning at a quarter or semester, or return from breaks to move to a less restrictive model. We felt the beginning of October did not allow us enough time to move large portions of the student body between models. Then the next natural opportunity is the beginning of November or the start of the second half of weeks, which both fell in the same week. So finally, it's always important at the beginning of the school year, as all of us know, to establish a sense of routine for our students and staff. This is one reason we don't schedule holidays prior to November. As we know, the 2021 school year will be remarkably different from prior school years. We felt this was even more important this year. It allows parents a chance to plan and schedule. So beginning in a different model would have increased the likelihood of abrupt school closure due to community spread in our schools, and this could result in moving students back and forth between models to start school.
So I think you probably just answered it, but I just want to clarify. So there is an opportunity to bring students back into schools within the first 9 weeks?
Certainly, there is an opportunity to bring students in. So schools are currently scheduling enrollment appointments and are in the process of scheduling IEP meetings for individual students. This would then be followed by various required screenings. We expect that we would be providing certain on-site related services for students with IEPs as we start the school year, regardless of which model we're in, especially related services. We'll also be analyzing all the metrics to determine our capacity to begin bringing students in, starting with our most vulnerable learners. As outlined in the state's guidance, as a reminder, those include students with disabilities, English learners, as well as our pre-K through 3 for in-person instruction. So there's certainly an opportunity.
And I don't want to leave Mr. Higginbotham out because sometimes I forget he's remotely up there. So I'll make sure you don't have a question to ask.
Yeah, you just mentioned metrics, and I asked about metrics a minute ago. Are we using the same metrics that we were that we talked about today, or that we were presented today, to determine possible changes within phases of the flexible framework?
Yeah, I'll let Dr. Carroll answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. So board members, you'll recall that, and you heard Mr. Pierce say that we've been in constant contact with him, and we've been looking at primarily those 2 data points, a positivity rate and the new case rate. And that's important because we have significant numbers of our staff that live in those surrounding counties. Now, we were working towards a formalized continuum adapted from the Virginia Beach model. And it had 3 thresholds where tracking those 2 rates we were going to look at. One would be putting us in a remote, another range would be putting us in either the hybrid or level. And then the one where rates were way down, that third one would be making it possible for us to be in the traditional. And in fact, we were planning to bring that to you or to present that yesterday in the Q&A session. And that was yesterday, which was Wednesday. But Tuesday morning, we were in the superintendent's call, state superintendent's call, and they unveiled that document that Mr. Pierce just shared. And that was, we'd never heard of that before, didn't know that was coming. And so we pulled that plan to track those 2 metrics and set up those thresholds in lieu of this new state tool. So as we wait for the finalized tool, because that's just interim guidance and it's a description, and we can't really do anything with that yet because you saw in the second paragraph is a list of bullets. Well, that's 8 data points. And then they're going to use an algorithm to pull that into one composite score or designation. And you heard Mr. Pierce say that there'll be 4 designations then. There'll be no community transmission, low community transmission, moderate, and substantial. And so what we're doing now is that while we wait for that, we're now going to use that draft document to take our flexible format, flexible framework, and marry it to that document, and then we'll wait to see the finalized form. But I would remind the board that this new composite score only serves half the metric puzzle. The other half is operational integrity, and you heard Dr. Bladu talk about that the last couple meetings, and so that's the other half of the puzzle.
All right, Ms. Carroll, I'm sorry, I might cut you off from some of your questions, so continue if you had additional.
And actually, you kind of touched on what I was just going to ask. In many of my conversations with the community, I find that they're confused about the staffing issues we might be facing because of the Department of Labor Family First Coronavirus Act. I don't even think I ever get it right. Can you clarify and maybe even give some examples for our community how that staffing issue would prevent students from returning to in-person instruction?
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Reltz. So under the remote hybrid and level model, where kids will be coming into a school, depending on the proportion, any employee with school-age children will be eligible for up to 12 weeks from a Family First Coronavirus Act. So let me give you an example. If I am required to come to work for 5 days, but my students only come to school for 2 days, 3 of those days, my students will be childcare or school may be affected. As such, I automatically would qualify for leave up to 12 weeks of FMLA. So this is important because under the traditional model, the staff in your county will no longer qualify for FMLA because their students will be going to school. But as we remember, 57% of our staff live in other school divisions. So if those other school divisions have a hybrid model or a remote model, then 57% of our staff would be affected. So it's a complicated issue. I would recommend that folks with questions about Family First Corona Response Act, there's a great Q&A on the Department of Labor. It goes to many, many scenarios, but it does affect our staff substantially because if there's any change to a child's schedule that's related to COVID-19, they would qualify for leave.
Okay, so am I correct in assuming that the same protection that's available for our staff members would be available for other working parents to help them in this difficult situation?
Yeah, that's a great point. Many localities, governments, municipalities, public employees, and corporations may qualify for this. But again, I do not want to speak for the HR departments. I would recommend that they go again to the U.S. Department of Labor website, and this is the FAQ that they could look at they qualify or not, and then if they're not aware, to contact the HR department and ask some good questions.
All right, my last question. I think this will probably be for Candy.
Okay.
Ms. Skinner. There's still a lot of confusion about remote and virtual models, and even though we've done a lot of question and answers, and how the day will be structured. And I know you can't give specifics about the times until the Department of Education gives you guidance on that. But I'm just wondering if, for example, I'm a parent and I've got a 3rd and a 5th grader. I work, I've got to send my children to childcare. Is there a model that will allow my kids a more self-paced thing so that they can do it in the evening or on the weekends when I can help them? And how do we as a division plan to help those families?
And we understand that, there's going to be challenges for our families. And what I want our families to know is that we will work with our families just as we've always worked with our families. And when we're in a traditional setting, we have families who have difficulty from time to time. We will work with those families. What I would say is in the flyer that we created for our families, this flyer, those first 2 boxes to me really speak to how to kind of frame your decision. The first one is I want my child to have the opportunity to receive instruction in a school building where when the division is able to do so safely. The other one is I want my child to ensure my child receives instruction in an online setting for safety and health reasons at least through the first semester. I would make my decision based on those concerns regarding health. If that family chooses the flexible framework, we will work with that family to help them in figuring out the details of the day and how we can make this work. We know that it's not going to be a perfect fit for every family, and we're going to have to try to find ways to help support them through this. With children, when you're talking about our youngest students, there's going to be synchronous instruction that's going to have to be included in either model, because of the work that we do with our youngest students. That's why the state superintendent has really made those children a priority, because a lot of the work with reading does require, small group instruction with a teacher. So both models are going to require that. What I would say is make your decision based on the needs of your family, and then we contact the principal, talk to the principal about what your unique needs are, and let us work with that family.
That was your last question. Mr. Schaefer, do you have any questions?
No, it's been everything. I was absorbing it all from the other day, from Monday on, and I think I've talked to everyone personally about the questions that I had.
Yeah, it's been a difficult time. The discussions we've had with parents, either on the phone, through text, through whatever means of communication, it's been very difficult. There's two sides, two separate sides actually. So it's been difficult.
Likewise, it's been robust discussion throughout. I do have one quick question. I just wanted to see where we are with regard to the regional programs such as Governor's School, with regard to progress. Generally, the return to school models are very similar. If you could give me an update on that, I'd really appreciate that.
Absolutely. I actually spoke with Casey, who works with the New Horizons. I guess he's the executive director for New Horizons, which is a lot of those regional programs. They have not made their announcement yet. I think he's working with the superintendent to do so. But we are working in close connection with them, so that our students are able to participate fully in those programs, that they will not be at any disadvantage to those programs. We're pretty much in weekly contact, if not sometimes more than weekly, just to make sure we know exactly what's happening. They work under the guise of Newport News, I believe, so I think there's some work that they're doing in their schools.
Yeah, all 6 districts have continued to collaborate as well.
Yeah, that was my assumption. I just wasn't sure how far along we were. There's still obviously decision making to be made. So
If you remember when we talked about that Wednesday being that student support day, we had worked with and spoke with many of the school divisions when we kind of locked in on that day, because we really wanted to make sure we're locking in. We learned that from our grafting experience. As much as possible, we need to be in lockstep with those regional programs, so our students are at least inconvenienced in this, making sure they have access to those classes, those programs. And that's what we've done to the best of our ability. And I imagine as soon as they make their announcement, we will be in very close contact and planning hand in hand.
so it's been ongoing. Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Jimmy, I did have one little question.
Go ahead.
I think it's for Jim. When Kevin was presenting to us, he told us that we could either look at York County or we could look at the whole Eastern District, which would be about 3 million people, and includes the South Side and all. Which one are we going to be paying attention to?
Well, we're primarily looking at the Peninsula Health District, which is Williamsburg, James City County, Houston, and Newport News, and us. Hampton is in a different district. However, I'm not sure how that's going to play out when we get this tool from the state. I think it is going to be a bit larger, looking at the eastern region as a whole, which is kind of a larger subset. So we won't know until we see the whole state tool.
You're talking about the metrics that the state is working on and coming out with.
Right, there's 8 data points that will become one composite designation.
And Mr. Higginbotham, I know we've been in some discussion again. I don't want to leave you out. So any other comments or questions that you have?
No, you've answered all of mine. Thank you.
Would you allow me one more? Excuse me. Hey, Dr. Vladu, we work very hard across the region whether it's with instruction or operations. Is our interpretation of the COVID Act, is it similar to other HR sections across the region? Are the interpretations similar? I know they go under legal review, but are we all interpreting that similarly?
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. I have been in contact with my colleagues, neighboring school division, to make sure we are aligned. We're very much aligned with them. So as we're working through this process, we're not going at it alone. We're making sure they're collaborating with our partner school division. So our approach to this policy is. However, the guidance from the U.S. Department of Labor is clear cut. And there's not a lot of room for interpretation here. However, in applying this, we want to make sure that it's consistent across the region.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And you had something, Ms. Carroll?
I was just saying if discussion was over, I think we can go ahead and make a motion.
You can make we have a motion on the floor, is what we have currently.
I would like to amend the motion if possible, please.
Okay.
I moved to begin the school year in the remote model with the division planning for opportunities to bring students groups back to school in priority order before the end of the first 9 weeks, if they're able to do so in accordance with identified metrics developed by the Virginia Department of Health, Virginia Department of Education, and York County School Division operational capacities. Priority will be given to our most vulnerable learners, which includes students within the following populations: students with disabilities, English learners, students in grades pre-K through 3, and will be followed by other grade levels.
Okay. So we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Been a motion and second. Ms. Gerald, I like that motion. I mean, I certainly appreciate the superintendent's recommendation, but I like the specifics of that. More especially the pre-K English learners or special needs population. It's something we really need to look out for. And that's the way I kind of understood your recommendation anyway, Dr. Shandor, but I think this really does clarify that, so I do like that. Any other comments or discussion?
No, I think, one of the critical features for all of us, and particularly myself with regard to decision-making, was, you're right, we want to focus on our most vulnerable learners, but we also want a very deliberate, phased approach to introducing learners back into an in-person environment or back into the brick and mortar dynamic. This lends itself to that, and it gives the superintendent wide latitude, I think, which is important. Thank you.
But I think it'll prevent us from going backwards once we do progress, which is big to me. I don't want to take 1 step forward and 2 steps back anymore. We want to do it right, and if there's one school division on the peninsula that can do it right, it's York County. We have the best people, the best teachers, the best students, and we can make the positive moves necessary to advance to finally, whenever this is done, to get back to tradition.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Mr. Higginbotham, any comments you'd like to make?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Ms. Geralt's to question of that one more time. The part where you were talking about using the metrics being developed by the VDH and the VDOE. Did you also say something about the ability for staffing needs and things like that inside the schools and the school system?
Yeah, we did say York County School Division operational capacities, which would encompass the staffing needs, but not just teachers. It would be across the entire board. So making sure that this just gets a little bit more specific. Again, lends itself to more clarity.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Well, I think at this point we've heard a lot of information, not just now, not just tonight. I mean, for the last month, over the month, it's been a lot. It's been very difficult to make these decisions, but I think at this point, the board needs to take a vote. We have a motion on the floor and we have a second. Ms. Ford, if you would call the board, please.
Yes, a motion was made by Mrs. Waltz and seconded by Mr. Schaefer to approve the return to school plan as amended to begin the school year in a remote model with the division planning for opportunities to bring student groups back to school in priority order before the end of the first 9 weeks if they are able to do so in accordance with identified metrics developed by the Virginia Department of Health, VDOE, and YCSD operational capacities, Priority will be given to our most vulnerable donors, which include students in the following populations: students with disabilities, English learners, students in grades pre-K through 3, and will be followed by other grade levels. Mr. Higginbotham?
Yes.
Mr. Maya?
Yes.
Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Ms. Cross?
Yes.
And Mr. Richardson?
Yes.
Motion passed 5-0.
Thank you, Ms. Ford. Again, this is a very difficult decision. But I'm going to move on to matters by board members, so board members can have to make any comments should they like to do that. I think I called you all individually and told you that I would have a board matters section at the end for you to make comments or whatever way this went. So we're going to start with Ms. Garrett.
Thank you. And I did write this down because a lot of this is very emotional for me, so I wanted to make sure I covered everything. But first of all, I do want to thank everyone who's called, emailed, texted, and spent time sharing their personal perspectives about the current situation we find ourselves in. As a new board member, it's definitely been trying because I can truly empathize with all your concerns. This decision affects all of us. My own daughter is due to student teach this year. My nephew loves playing the tuba in band, and my niece is a struggling reader entering the 2nd grade. There are a couple things I do want to say to our community. I want kids back in school, but I also want to be sure that our students and staff are safe. I respect that people have varying opinions and are extremely passionate about the decision made tonight. I have made it very clear that I want families to have a choice: in-person instruction if they're comfortable, and virtual if they are not. Department of Labor rules mean that we must also provide our staff with a choice if schools are closed here and in surrounding areas. We cannot have in-person instruction without the appropriate number of teachers across all grade levels and subject matter. It's important to remember that we did not create this pandemic and are trying to operate within the confines of what the pandemic means for our schools. That means navigating state and federal hurdles in addition to our own local hurdles. Ultimately, it means that we don't always get what we want, and we have to find a way to make the best of an awful situation. Many of you have insinuated that the board isn't listening, and I assure you that we are. Many have asked why we just can't go with whatever the majority asked for in our survey, and the answer is this: the survey is only one piece in a 500-piece puzzle. When I was a PTA president at York Middle, we surveyed the students to find out what they wanted from their PTA. They said they wanted 5 recesses a day, they wanted us to get rid of wheat crust pizza, and they wanted a dodgeball tournament. In our position, we could not obviously deliver the first 2 because of restrictions, but we were able to deliver a dodgeball tournament. And I think this is much the same situation. Here are the things that I know. I know we have an amazing community that's going to rally and come together and support each other. And I think that's what this time asks for, so that we can make the best of a less than ideal situation. I know, for example, Edge Hill in District 3 is working on a plan to get students in the neighborhood together with safety and supervision. And I know other neighborhoods are going to be able to follow that as well. I have faith in our excellent administrators and staff. I know they want our kids to succeed, and they're also being thrust into a new situation just like we are, and they deserve grace. Even when kids are back in the building, in-person instruction will be continually interrupted by COVID positive tests and shutdowns for cleaning and contact tracing. We all need to understand that this is the current situation and know that remote learning will be a part of the equation no matter what. There is no plan or option that will take us back to what normal used to be. My vote tonight was based on all the data and information available to me, but it does not mean I didn't listen to and empathize with each constituent who reached out to me. My sincere hope is that we can safely get some kids back into the building soon. Moving forward, I'm going to continue to stay positive. I'm going to help any way I can in my community. I'm going to keep asking questions. I'm going to continue to pray that this pandemic ends soon and we can heal some of the division that this caused. And I'm going to show grace and be kind because I know that's what everyone needs right now. So I realize that was long, but I definitely, again, I'm very emotional about this. This has been a very crazy opening to being a school board member. So I appreciate you listening, and I hope that you'll understand.
Thank you, Ms. Geraldson. Well said. So next, Mr. Higginbotham.
Yes, I also wrote down some of my thoughts, and I will apologize in advance for any lengthiness that might occur, but there was so much that went into this decision. I wanted to make sure that I had everything written down and I wouldn't forget anything. Chairman Richardson, fellow board members, Dr. Shandor and staff, teachers, staff, families, and students. First off, please allow me to thank everyone who reached out to me and my fellow board members over the past few weeks and even back to the past few months. The emails and phone calls with concerns, thoughts, suggestions, and well wishes have been helpful while discussing this very difficult topic. I appreciate you taking the time to contact me and other board members, as receiving public input is a huge part of our responsibility as board members, and we do not take this lightly. We must come together as a community to provide the best education possible for the circumstances that we find ourselves in. To me, this comes down to health concerns for all involved in the educational system: students, teachers, paraeducators, administrators, custodians, food service workers, school psychologists, social workers, counselors, school resource officers, office staff, coaches, and I apologize for anyone else that I may have missed. How can we guarantee the safety of everyone involved while in school? The answer here is that we can't. In a conversation with another board member this week, we discussed how no one asked for this novel coronavirus to become a part of our everyday lives. The virus holds no political affiliation, nor should it be politicized. The virus is simply too new to be able to accurately estimate and predict what will happen in the future. Therefore, we must start conservatively as we begin another school year. There are only 6 months worth of data and studies of the coronavirus, which makes it near impossible to compare it to anything else, since we have never seen anything like this before. New scientific studies continue to add to our understanding of this disease and its transmission, and as a result, recommendations change daily, if not hourly, in regards to COVID-19. Because of this, there is no right answer to how will we open buildings for face-to-face instruction. As a community, we are mourning the loss of our normal day-to-day life. I empathize with the loss of the way things were, but I cannot dwell in it. While in mourning, it is easy to project anger and resentment on something or someone else in an attempt to manipulate or control the situation, whether you do it consciously or subconsciously. Over the last few weeks, I have seen and heard this happening towards teachers. I want to remind everyone that the teachers are not the ones making this decision. These are the same teachers that were praised for how hard their job was a few short weeks ago when the buildings were closed and they had 48 hours to figure out the impossible task of how to move an entire curriculum online. The public proudly proclaimed that teachers deserve to be paid whatever they want, and the funding for schools needs to be increased exponentially. And mere weeks later, the teachers' professionalism has been attacked by few. They are told that they are lazy if they advocate for virtual learning, which is probably harder than face-to-face instruction. They're not allowed to feel apprehensive about returning to the classroom, and that it probably just won't affect them. Teachers are told they should just deal with it and get back to work, and if they won't, then we should stop funding the schools and furlough teachers and staff. This sends a message that their lives and careers are worthless, and it belittles their entire profession. Teachers are continually asked to do more with less, which is a topic for a different day. With less funding, less materials, less instructional time, but more state mandates and standardized testing. And to top it off, they accept the loss of a promised raise and increased healthcare costs with grace. The teachers deserve to be lifted up and not degraded. I want the teachers to know that there are many more who stand with you, trust you, and thank you for your amazing dedication to the kids of YCSD. You deserve better and should be treated accordingly. Now, let me be clear. Everyone wants students to be back in school, but the fact of the matter is that this year cannot be like previous years. Students would not be able to sit next to each other at lunch, participate in the same way in gym, or even play on the playground like they used to. They can't even complete group work together in class. Teachers will constantly worry about social distancing in their classrooms, and their instruction methods might revert to more of a lecture and worksheet style. I can't say I would blame them either. This year simply cannot be the same as previous years. So we move forward. We must implement a temporary but new way of educating children, and it is temporary. Eventually, the coronavirus will be under control, spread will not be so prevalent. We will be resilient, and eventually COVID-19 will be in all of our rearview mirrors. But until that time comes, we must adapt. New studies show that while children may not have as severe symptoms or any at all, some of them do, and they can spread it to others. More and more children are testing positive around the country. Hospitalization rates in children in Florida have skyrocketed just weeks before they return to school. Take a look at any major league sport that has restarted. All of them have reported new coronavirus cases. And these athletes exist within a bubble with unlimited money and resources, team doctors, and no shortage of tests and fast results. The Miami Marlins just had to cancel games less than 1 week into a shortened MLB season because of at least 17 players and coaches who tested positive. The Phillies today had to cancel their workouts on their day off because of positive tests. Clemson has had over 40 student athletes test positive since training began. And in Georgia, 655 high school athletes and coaches have tested positive for COVID-19 since June 8th, when they were permitted to return to summer conditioning. It is possible to believe that school buildings need to be closed and that this creates a terrible hardship on families. They are not two mutually exclusive thoughts. My family is included in this hardship. My wife and I are both teachers. We have 2 elementary school age children. There very well may be 4 different devices being used to attend or teach 4 different virtual classes at the same time this fall. I don't argue that families are put in very difficult situations, but the inflexibility of employers is not the fault of the education system. Now is the time for employers to become more flexible, offering more leave options, altering work schedules where possible, support for applying for the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, among others. Community members can step up and offer help and services. We all saw this in response to the Grafton School Complex fire in February. It will take all of us to support the students and families of YCSD. We all want to have students in classrooms with their teachers face to face, but we must figure out how to do it safely and responsibly. Until we can do that, we must start remotely. There just isn't any way of knowing if we're overreacting, but it will be abundantly clear if we have underreacted. The possibility of one staff member, student, or extended family members suffering long-term adverse health effects or even death from COVID-19 because we opened school prematurely is simply not a risk that I am willing to take. Thank you for listening to my thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. And next we'll go to Mr. Schaefer.
Good evening. It has been an honor to serve as a member of this school board in such unprecedented times. I want all my stakeholders in District 1 to know that I have taken each of your concerns very seriously. Some I've talked with a number of times and emailed a number of times. I've been an advocate for returning to school in the classroom for a very long time. Both the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics stress the importance of young children being back in school. Up until a few weeks ago, I was ready to start the journey to normalcy. As many of you know, my wife is a first grade teacher. I feel that our youngest learners, special education, and our English learners all needed to be in school with teacher interaction in order for their academic needs to be met. I'm especially burdened for the 23% of York County families that qualify for free or reduced lunch. I cannot imagine financial strain this is putting on these families. Unfortunately, with the sudden uptick in COVID-19 cases in Hampton Roads, the Virginia Department of Health has issued guidelines that will not make this possible at this time. Rest assured that as soon as we meet metrics communicated by the Virginia Department of Health, we shall vote for a return to school. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Mr. Myatt?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is, I'm proud to serve with all the members here on the board. It has been robust discussion, a great deal of questions, and it's been frankly a fantastic dynamic, and I wanted to personally thank all the members of the board. What I'm going to do is I'm going to deviate a little bit. I'm going to take a little bit of risk. I'm just going to highlight from some of the board narratives. I'm going to share with you a couple of insights or several insights on my own decision making, and then I'll end with additional thanks. Again, just to clarify, the input, insights, and observations and personal discussions with our constituents by dozens and dozens has been very uplifting. Some of those conversations were very frank, and the inputs came from across the spectrum. And like my fellow board members, I wanted to make sure that I thank the stakeholders and community members and constituents for District 5 for their input. As Mr. Schaefer and everybody highlighted, we are all advocates, and I can speak for everybody in this room and for those on the board, if they don't mind, for in-person instruction with their teachers in school. But unfortunately, as Mr. Pierce has laid out, the current conditions won't permit for that, and this is part of my own decision-making. I think we all appreciate where current conditions of the existing situation lies. But just as importantly, I think, again, introducing tens of thousands of children into buildings in the locale and on the peninsula would create for a disastrous situation in regard to infection and ultimately transmission throughout the community and amongst our homes. And we would then probably and most likely suffer a severe backslide back to phases 1 and 2. In short, we have to get this right, and I think we're on track to getting it right. I think the motion tonight, the adjustments we've made, puts us in a situation where we're looking at a very, again, deliberate, carefully phased plan that's driven by metrics and data, and that will be critical, again, to getting this right. And then finally, thanks to Dr. Shandor, his leadership and the team, gone through a great deal. It's been a transparent process. They solicited input from surveys and focus groups, public comments, citizen email, text messages, voicemail, multiple or numerous telephone conversations with stakeholders from across the community and the region. Again, greatly appreciate everybody's input into this process and decision-making and your leadership as well as Mr. Richardson's leadership. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. I think all the board members say a lot for most of our sentiment for what we have tonight, what we believe. I want kids back in school, face-to-face instruction. The superintendent wants them back in school. Staff here wants them back in school. Teachers want them back in school. Parents want them back in school. We all want that. But I just don't think that's the best decision for our students, staff, families, and our community right now with everything that we've heard. So that's why I made the decision I made. The information we're getting is very fluid. It changes daily. We just got some information just a couple of days ago. It just continues to change and come in. And it's very difficult and complex. I have grandchildren that'll be going to schools here in a few years. I have a daughter that's a teacher in a local school district across the river. I have friends that have children that go to York County schools. And I had to think of that when I made my decision to think of what would I want personally? What would I do with my kids if they were still in school, who went to York County school? I just don't believe it's worth the risk to the students, the staff, or the greater community towards ahead with in-person school. I do realize this puts a lot of our working parents in a difficult position, but I believe it's the right decision. I know there are loud and angry voices on both sides, and in this situation, I just think safety has to be the priority. So despite all these issues, they pale in comparison to losing a teacher, a staff member, or God forbid, a child to COVID. But as one parent said that wrote me an email, and I quote, "Remote learning isn't a great choice, but under these circumstances, it's the best choice." And we're going to move on, and I think all the comments were very heartfelt, and thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Higginbotham. Again, very difficult decisions for all involved here. So our next school board meeting is scheduled for Monday, August 24th. The meeting location and time will be confirmed prior to the meeting, and we're now adjourned. Everyone have a great evening. Thank you.